Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Gaurav Kumar Jain from Jamia Hamdard, New Delhi. Today we are going to discuss about Compaction Technology under paper Product Development Part 1. In this module, we will learn about various stages of compaction and compression, physics of compaction technology including compaction profiles, equations and indices, and factors that influence compaction of pharmaceutical powders. We start with introduction. All along the history of pharmacy, oral route has been the most preferred way of drug administration, and oral solid dosage forms have been widely used mainly because of their convenience of administration, ease of manufacturing, accurate dosing, and patient compliance. Out of powders, granules, pellets, tablets, and capsules, tablets have been dosage form of first choice in the development of new drug entities and account for nearly 80% of all pharmaceutical preparations. Thus, great interest has been focused on the design of tablet dosage forms with optimal therapeutic properties. Tablets of various types and biopharmaceutical properties, from conventional immediate release tablet to advanced modified release system, exist, but their common denominator is the way in which they are formed, that is, powder compaction. Over the years, there has been considerable confusion in literature around tableting terminology. Different terms such as compressibility, compactability, and tabletability have been used to describe the same type of relationship. Although these terms are used interchangeably, but these terms differ each other on basis of three variables: pressure, tensile strength, and porosity. Compressibility is defined as ability of a material to undergo reduction in volume as a result of an applied pressure. Compactability is defined as ability of a material to produce tablets with sufficient tensile strength under the effect of densification, and tabletability is defined as capacity of a powdered material to transformed into a tablet of specified strength under the effect of compaction pressure. In the present module, compaction and/or compression is used to describe the complete process. The compaction can be described as the process whereby a powder or granule is converted into a coherent mass, usually by confining between die and punches. The first step in formation of compact is the densification or reduction of the porosity of the powder bed, followed by formation of interparticulate bonds that form a stable and durable adhesive junction to produce tough and rigid compact. Compaction represents one of the most important unit operation in the pharmaceutical industry because physical and mechanical properties of the tablets are determined during this process. Further, dosage form integrity and bioavailability is also related to the tablet compression process. The development of compressed tablet is a complex process involving many variables and engineering principles and the complete understanding of the physics of compaction. Understanding the compaction process requires the knowledge of the flow behavior of powder, the densification mechanism, the formation of bonds, the response of porous compact during unloading, and the ejection operation. Physical and bulk properties of drug and excipients such as porosity, flow, particle size, size distribution, crystal habit, polymorphism, and crystal moisture affects the compression properties. Simple compression of a bulk material into a robust tablet is also influenced by process variables such as compression force, rate of force transfer, particle deformation behavior, and the adhesive forces between the particles. The use of physical data to predict tableting behavior of particles such as compressibility and compactability is limited, and tablet formulation is still based on empirical knowledge rather than on scientific theory. Thus, An improved theoretical understanding of the compaction process will enable a more rational approach to the formulation of tablets. Mechanistic aspects of compaction process from a pharmaceutical point of view is discussed in this module. Compaction, as described earlier, is a mechanical process where the state of material is changed from loose powder to coherent mass or compact of given porosity. The compaction process is composed of the following stages. First, compression and consolidation of the powder mass. Second, decompression of the compact. And third, subsequent ejection of tablet from the die. A schematic representation of the compression process is shown on the screen. To study the mechanism by which powder materials are compressed, it is essential to study all stages of compression cycle and to understand how various variables affect the finished tablet. Now we will discuss first stage, that is compression and consolidation. The compression stage is divided into three phases. First, particle rearrangement. Second, particle deformation. And third, consolidation. Now we will discuss particle rearrangement or repacking. The first thing that happens when a powder is compressed, that the particles are rearranged under low compaction pressures to form a closer packing structure. The finer particles enter the voids between the larger ones and gives a closer packing arrangement without deformation. The process is shown in figure on the screen. In this process, the energy is evolved as a result of interparticulate friction, and there is increase in the amount of particle surface area capable of forming interparticulate bonds. In most cases, this is the main mechanism of initial volume reduction. The next is particle deformation. Subsequent to first process, the particles reach a state where further relative movement is impossible. At this stage, application of the force results in force being transmitted in through these interparticulate points of contact, leading to development of stress and local deformation of the particles. The deformation process are detailed below. The first one is elastic deformation. When the punch exerts a pressure on the tableting material initially and elastic deformation occurs. This stage is characterized by the fact that powder or granules resume their original shape upon removal of the force. With several pharmaceutical materials such as microcrystalline cellulose and starch, elastic deformation is the dominant mechanism of compression. The stress-strain relationship showing elastic deformation is shown on the screen. The next deformation is plastic deformation. Upon increasing the pressure, the elastic limit of material is exceeded, which results in plastic deformation, and the particles remain irreversibly deformed upon removal of the applied pressure. Substances such as pre-gelatinized starch and sodium chloride undergoes plastic deformation. Some plastic deformation processes are time dependent and occur at various rates during the compaction sequence, so that the tablet mass is never in stress-strain equilibrium during the actual tableting event. Such materials exhibit time-dependent viscoelastic behavior. The stress-strain relationship showing plastic deformation is shown on the screen. Next is brittle fracture. When the force is further increased, fragmentation of the compressed material may result. This is most likely to occur when the energy of crystal defect is higher than the binding energy between the lattice. Hard brittle particles such as of sucrose, a commonly used tablet diluent, undergoes brittle fracture. The stress-strain relationship showing brittle fracture is shown on screen. Normally, mixture of excipients are used in tablet formulation. As different materials may possess different deformation properties, tablet blends usually have a complex deformation pattern, and elastic deformation, plastic deformation, and brittle fracture may occur simultaneously. The degree of volume reduction that a pharmaceutical powder bed undergoes depends on the mechanical properties of the powder and the type of volume reduction mechanism involved. Generally, brittle materials that undergo extensive brittle fracture results in tablet of relatively high porosity because of the large number of bonding points that are created, which prevent further volume reduction. A ductile material, on the other hand, will often result in tablet of low porosity because the high degree of plastic deformation enables the particles to move very close to each other. Nevertheless, all of the deformation effects may be accompanied by the breaking and formation of new bonds between the particles, which give rise to consolidation as the new surfaces are pressed together. Consolidation. Consolidation involves increase in the mechanical strength resulting from particle-particle interactions. The mechanical strength of a tablet depends on the dominating bonding mechanism between the particles and the surface area over which these bonds act. Few bonding mechanisms commonly described in the literature are mentioned here. The first is formation of solid bridges between particles as a result of melting, crystallization, sintering, chemical reaction, and binder hardening. Bonding can occur between particles as a result of movable liquids due to capillary and surface tension forces. Bonding can also occur due to viscous binder and adsorption layers. Bonding can occur due to attraction between solid particles due to intermolecular forces. Further, bonding can also occur due to mechanical interlocking between irregular particles. However, dominating bond types for dry powders are solid bridges, mechanical interlocking, and intermolecular forces including van der Waals forces, hydrogen bonding, and electrostatic forces. These bonds are of a special importance for directly compressible binders such as polyvinyl pyrrolidone and microcrystalline cellulose. The second stage is decompression. The compressional process is followed by a decompression stage as the applied force is removed. This leads to a new set of stresses within the tablet as a result of elastic recovery, which is augmented by the forces necessary to eject the tablet from the die. Irrespective of the consolidation mechanism, the tablets must be mechanically strong enough to accommodate these stresses, otherwise structural failure will occur. The degree and rate of relaxation within the tablet is the characteristic of a particular blend. Recording of this stage provides insights into tableting problems. For example, if the degree and rate of elastic recovery are high, the tablet may cap or laminate. Second, if the tablet undergoes brittle fracture during decompression, the compact may form failure planes as a result of fracturing of surfaces. Addition of a plastically deforming agent such as polyvinyl pyrrolidone and microcrystalline cellulose is advisable to reduce the risk of such structure failures. The third stage is ejection. The last stage in compression cycle is ejection of the tablet from the die cavity. Ejection phase requires force to break the adhesion between die wall and compact surface to eject the tablet. The compact can suffer mechanical failure because of the release of stored energy. A typical ejection profile is shown on the screen. In this figure, point A is known as static ejection force and corresponds to force required to overcome die wall tablet adhesion and to initiate movement of the compact. After this initial movement of the compact, the force decreases to a value that remains nearly constant throughout the ejection process until part of compact is ejected from the die. This is called as dynamic ejection force and corresponds to point B in the figure. The ejection force then falls gradually as shown by point C, indicating complete removal of compact from the die. The value of A, B and C are dependent upon the compact aspect ratio, the compaction pressure used to form compact and die wall lubrication. Including lubricant in a formulation to reduce friction at the die wall minimizes mechanical failure. However, it also has the negative effect on compact strength because of reduction in cohesion characteristics. The unequal stress exerted on the compact during ejection can cause stress planes that break bonds and result in capping or lamination. Lubricants minimize stress pattern, so they reduce the tendency for materials to cap or laminate. The particle size of the powder material also has an effect on ejection force and shear. As particle size decreases, more of its surface may be in contact with the die wall. This adds to increased friction forces and the generation of heat. If more particle surface is available for contact with the die wall, larger forces may be required to remove the compact. Now we discuss physics of compression. The mechanics of tablets is very complex and a great deal of scientific effort is required to analyze compaction behavior of tablet. Compaction profiles obtained from instrumented punches and dies can be fitted to mathematical equations to elucidate the compaction behavior. Compaction profiles. Compaction data obtained from instrumented tableting machines are basically of two types: force time and force displacement profiles. First, we will discuss compression force time profiles. Compression force time profiles are used to characterize compression behavior of tablet components with respect to their plastic and elastic deformation. A usual force versus time curve is shown on screen is segmented into three phases. The first phase is compression phase, where there is horizontal and vertical punch movement. The second phase is dwell phase, where there is only horizontal punch movement as plane punch head area is under compression roller. Third phase is decompression phase, where both punches move away from the tablet surface. The force versus time profile gives information about these phases as well as about various characteristic parameters of the compression cycle. In the force time profile, the time to reach maximum force is called as consolidation time. The time at which maximum displacement occurs is called as dwell time, and the time for compression and decompression is called as contact time. The first parameter is compression area. The area under the curve A1, called as compression area, represents compression phase. Compression area is related to density of material, and for low density excipients such as microcrystalline cellulose, A1 is large, and for high density excipients such as dicalcium phosphate, A1 is small. The second parameter is dwell time coefficient. The area ratio of A6 by A5, called as dwell time coefficient, can be used to measure the plasticity of a substance. The sharp curve and decrease in force over dwell time is indicative of plastic materials, whereas plateau is observed for brittle substances like dicalcium phosphate and crystalline lactose. The next parameter is peak offset time. Peak offset time is the difference between the time of maximum pressure and the middle of the dwell time. The duration of peak offset time depends on the ability of the compacted powder to relieve stress and thus is indicative of mechanism of particle deformation during consolidation. Short values are characteristic of materials that consolidate mainly by brittle fracture, whereas longer values indicate plastic flow. The next parameter from the graph is decompression area. The area under the decompression curve A4 is measure of fast elastic expansion. All these parameters along with total area under the force versus time curve are used for phase specific allocation of the occurrence of plastic flow. The next compaction profile is force versus displacement profile. A common method for assessment of the compaction behavior of materials is the use of compression force versus punch displacement profiles, from which the work involved during tablet compaction can be calculated. A typical force versus displacement profile is shown on the screen. Force versus displacement curve as shown on screen is a result of various stages of compression. When upper punch moves from the insertion point E into the die, the particles undergo rearrangement and repacking until an increase of the force is observed, denoted by S. This is phase A of the curve. As force increases, particles undergo deformation. Force becomes maximal, that is M, as upper punch reaches its lowest point U. This is represented by phase B of the curve. Finally, upon withdrawal of punches, the elastic deformation of the compressed material occurs. This is represented by phase C of the curve. This goes on until punch loses contact with tablet, reflected by capital A. The forceless movement of punch to the insertion point is represented by phase D of the curve. The force versus displacement curve determines the energy consumed during compaction and depicts the compression behavior of the particles. By connecting points E, M and U in the force versus displacement profile, a triangle is obtained, the area of which is proportional to the total amount of energy E1, E2, E3 that has been used during compression. Substances with high E2 and low E1 and E3 demonstrate good compression properties. This information can be used to predict the compaction behavior of pharmaceutical materials as well as to explain the behavior of the material during compaction. Higher the compressibility of a material, lesser is the amount of work needed to compress it to a certain final volume and vice versa. After compaction profiles, now we will discuss compaction equations. The relationship between compaction pressure and volume reduction or density increase has been widely studied and several equations have been proposed to fit curves based on pressure and volume fraction. These equations provide an understanding of the basic mechanisms of the compaction process and also the magnitude of the resulting compact strength as well as characterizing the overall compaction process. The main equations widely described in the literature are the Volcker equation, the Kawakita equation and the Heckle's equation. Now we will first discuss Volcker's equation. One of the earliest relationship was proposed by Volcker in the year 1923. Volcker related the relative volume V of the powder compact against the logarithm of the applied pressure P as shown in the following equation on the screen. In the equation, K and A are the constant. The next equation is Kawakita equation. The basis for the Kawakita equation for powder compression is that the particles are subjected to compressive load in equilibrium at all stages of compression so that the product of pressure term and volume term is constant. The Kawakita equation is shown on the screen. In the equation, P is the applied pressure, C is the degree of volume reduction, A is constant related to degree of volume reduction for the bed of particles, and B is constant proposed to be inversely related to the yield strength of particles. The Kawakita equation holds best for soft, fluffy pharmaceutical powders and is best used for low pressure and high porosity situations. The next equation to discuss is Heckle's equation. The Heckle equation is based on the assumption that densification of the bulk powder under force follows first order kinetics. The Heckle's equation is shown on the screen. In this equation, P is compaction pressure, D is the relative density at given pressure, K and A are the constants. A plot of natural log of 1 versus 1 minus D against P, referred to as Heckle's plot, is a density compression force relation that determines the plastic behavior of the materials. According to Heckle relationship, as porosity increases, compression force also increases. A typical Heckle plot, as shown on the screen, is divided into three regions. Region 1 corresponds to particle rearrangement at low pressure. Region 2, the linear part of the curve, gives the plasticity of the material. The slope of this line is referred to as Heckle's constant K, related to the reciprocal of the mean yield pressure, which is minimum pressure required to cause deformation of the material undergoing compression. Large values of Heckle's constant indicates the greater plastic deformation at relatively low pressure, whereas a small value indicates brittle fracture. Region 3 of the graph is observed at higher pressures due to strain hardening. The intercept of the line will give the constant A, which indicates volume reduction or densification of the powder bed by dye filling and particle rearrangement. dA gives densification due to initial particle rearrangement, whereas D0 gives densification due to initial dye filling. The difference in shape of Heckle's plot of a material with different initial particle sizes could be used to give information about the method of compaction for that material. Apart from density versus pressure relationship, another approach to characterize the properties of compact is by dimensionless Heinstein indices. Heinstein indices such as bonding index, brittle fracture index and strain index gives insight about relative tableting performance of the material. Bonding index estimates the survival of bonds during decompression. The bonding index value range from 0 to 0.04. Materials with low bonding index value produce friable compacts, whereas higher bonding index value represents stronger compacts which survive the die wall and ejection forces. The brittle fracture index indicates the ability of material to relieve localized stresses within the compact by plastic deformation. Materials with high brittle fracture index would be less able to relieve stresses during decompression and ejection and therefore be more susceptible to capping and lamination. A brittle fracture index of 0 indicates that stress at the hole had been completely relieved by plastic deformation, whereas brittle fracture index of 1 corresponds to pure brittle material. Usually, problems crop up when brittle fracture index is 0.8 or more. The strain index indicates the relative strain energy changes during elastic recovery after plastic deformation. The values range from 0 to 0.04, and a high strain index value shows potential structural failures in terms of capping and lamination as a result of high elastic recovery after decompression. Now we will briefly describe the factors influencing compaction of powders. The quantification of the parameters that affect the compaction process are vital for product uniformity. Moisture content, crystal habit, particle size distribution, polymorphism, salt form, solid state of lubricants and their concentration, co-processing of excipients or drugs, granulation techniques, tableting speed, mechanism by which particles undergo compaction, and compression force all are known to affect the compaction of pharmaceutical powders. All these factors are interrelated to each other and cannot be considered in isolation. The various factors, by acting at the fundamental level, have the capability to influence the behavior of powder under compaction. Now we'll first discuss the effect of moisture content. Moisture content plays an important role in interparticulate bond formation and is a determinant of the plasticity of a blend. It enhances the tensile strength of the powder bed and decreases the density variation within the tablet. Moisture not only affects the flow but also affects mixing rheology, true density, mechanical properties of granules, and compaction. Water plays a key role in all manufacturing steps, and thus powder versus water interaction is a major factor in the processing and performance of solid dosage forms. Next factor to study is compression force. It is well known that speed of compression can have significant effect on the compaction properties. This particularly is a challenge during scale-up and technology transfer when tableting speeds increase significantly. Altering the method of force application is beneficial for increasing tablet strength and preventing the incidence of capping and lamination. For a given pressure, double compaction produces stronger tablets than single compaction. Compression force and tableting speed influences the time-dependent deformation behavior of the pharmaceuticals, and thus ratio and magnitude of pre and main compaction pressures can be varied depending on the deformation behavior of materials. Next property that influence the compaction of powder is solid state properties. Solid state properties of drugs and excipients such as their particle size and size distribution, hydration and solvation state, crystal habit and polymorphism influences compaction properties. These properties can also affect tableting behavior and flowability of the powder blend. The solid state properties, particularly particle size distribution, can affect both the particle rearrangement and compaction phases, and proper correlation are needed to design a perfect tablet. The next factor is salt form. Salt form of a drug also affects compaction properties because different salts owing to different physical properties have different compaction behavior. Melting temperature of salt is an indicator of its tensile strength at zero porosity. Granulation method and binder also affects compaction properties. As a result of poor flowability and compaction behavior, pharmaceutical powders are subjected to process of granulation prior to tableting. The optimal granulation method is selected for production of porous and free-flowing granules, which enables formation of tablets with high mechanical strength at low compression pressures. Through this module, we understand that compaction is an integral step for the manufacture of tablets, and it is imperative to understand the underlying physics of compaction. Complete understanding of compaction physics still eludes us because variables such as solid state properties, inherent deformation behavior of drugs and excipients, and process parameters are known to affect the final tablet characteristics. Understanding of compaction profiles such as force versus time profile, force versus displacement profile, and pressure versus porosity relationship can help in deciphering the dynamics of the process and can aid pharmaceutical scientists to design optimum formulation devoid of problems such as capping, lamination, picking, and sticking. Study of compaction behavior of the tablet matrix and of individual excipients can enable science-based selection of excipients. Further, optimization of process and product parameters that affect the compaction process can help in achieving satisfactory tensile strength and desired biopharmaceutical properties in tablet drug products. Thank you.